The day I met him, I had already decided to disappear. Not dramatically, not in the way that scares people, just quietly stop trying. I was sitting on the floor of a train station cafe bathroom, crying over a life I didn't know how to live anymore. And then someone knocked on the door. That someone changed everything. If this story touches something in you, something you maybe can't even name right now, hit that subscribe button and stay with me. Because this one, I've never told anyone before. My name is Mira Calloway. And before I tell you about him, I need to tell you about who I was the morning we met, because that context matters more than anything. I was 27 years old, and I had not touched a piano in 14 months. For most people, that sentence means nothing. For me, it was the equivalent of saying I had not breathed in 14 months. I grew up with music the way other kids grew up with language. It was just the air inside our house. My mother, Celestine Calloway, was a concert pianist. Not famous in the way pop stars are famous, but known, respected. The kind of woman who walked into a room and made it feel like the acoustics improved. And I was her daughter, her student, her greatest project. And when she died, I didn't just lose my mother, I lost the entire architecture of my identity. Aunt Renata moved in 2 weeks after the funeral, which I think she genuinely believed was an act of love, and maybe it was. But Renata's love had always felt like a room with no windows, warm enough, but you could never quite breathe. She had loved my mother completely and purely, and she transferred that love to me the way you transfer something fragile, carefully, with good intentions, but never quite naturally. That morning, the morning everything changed, I opened a letter from a solicitor's office. The house, my childhood home, was being partially sold to settle debts my mother had left behind. Beautiful, chaotic, completely typical of her. She had always lived inside music, not inside spreadsheets. I stood in the kitchen holding that letter, and I felt something in me just unlock. Not break, unlock. Like a door swinging open to nothing. I packed a bag. I didn't tell Renata where I was going. She caught me in the hallway and asked, and I said, nowhere, just not here. And she said, very quietly, your mother would have wanted you to stay. And I want you to understand what that sentence did to me. It wasn't cruel. That's the worst part. It was just the key she always used to lock every door I tried to open. I got on a train to Harwick, a small coastal town I'd visited once as a child, for no reason I could logically explain. I just needed somewhere that didn't smell like grief. The train ride was quiet. I watched other people's lives through the window. A man falling asleep on his own shoulder, 2 teenagers sharing earphones, a woman reading something that made her smile every few pages. Normal lives. Lives who at the center of gravity. I pressed my forehead against the glass and thought, very calmly, that I had forgotten what the point of me was. It was raining when I arrived in Harwick. My phone was dead. The room I'd booked had the wrong date on the confirmation, and the landlady was apologetic, but firm. I found a small cafe near the harbor, asked the girl at the counter if I could charge my phone, ordered a tea I could barely afford, and sat down in the corner like a person who was managing perfectly fine. I wasn't managing perfectly fine. At the table next to me, 2 women were talking loudly enough that I couldn't ignore it. One of them said, "A person who wastes their talent is worse than someone who never had it." She was talking about someone else entirely, but it landed in my chest like she'd aimed it. I excused myself to the bathroom. I sat down on the tile floor with my back against the cold wall, and I cried. Not the dramatic kind of crying, the quiet kind. The kind that happens when something has been leaking for so long that you stop even noticing the sound of it. I laughed a little, actually, sitting there, because I thought, This is the most pathetic I have ever been, and somehow naming it like that took just enough of the weight off. Then there were 2 knocks at the door, patient, unhurried, and a voice, low and unbothered, said, "I'm not rushing you, I just wanted to make sure you were okay in there." I opened the door expecting someone annoyed. Instead, I found Soren Ashby. He was tall, a little disheveled, wearing a long coat that clearly lived a full life, with a cello case slung over one shoulder. And the thing I noticed first, the thing I still think about, was that he didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like you look at a person. Just a full person having a hard moment. That difference, I would understand later, was everything. He asked me, completely seriously, "Bad day or bad life?" I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I just mean, are you okay right now, or is this more of an ongoing situation?" Something about the matter-of-factness of it made me laugh for real. He bought me another tea without asking, sat across from me like we'd done this 100 times. We didn't exchange names for a while, and there was something quietly beautiful about that, being nobody to each other in the best possible way. He told me he was in Harwick for a small concert residency at a manor house called Aldenmere. He helped me find a room there, and over the next 3 days, without either of us planning it or naming it, we fell into each other's orbit. We walked along the coast in the mornings. We had long dinners where the conversation moved like water. No destination, no agenda. One evening, he played for me in the empty concert hall, not performing, just playing. And there is a difference that only musicians understand. I cried again. He didn't comment on it, just kept playing. And then, one night, I found myself alone in the hall with the piano. I sat down, stared at the keys for a long time, and then I played. Haltingly at first, and then from somewhere old and true. Soren was in the doorway. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. Afterward, he said, very quietly, "That was the most honest thing I've heard in years." And I thought, so are you. That's exactly what you are. I learned that Soren came from the Ashby family, old money, a significant name in classical music. He had been disinherited 3 years ago for refusing to make his art into a product. He lived simply and deliberately, and there was a freedom in him that I had never seen in anyone else. A freedom I think I'd been starving for without knowing it. Then, one morning, a car arrived, expensive and out of place. Dominic Ashby, Soren's older brother, stepped out, charming in the practiced way that makes you careful. He had brought someone with him, a woman named Lena, gracious, beautiful, and apparently once Soren's fiancée. She pulled me aside at some point and said, almost gently, "He makes you feel like the only person in the world. He means it too. That's the thing about Soren. He genuinely means it. Just be careful with what you build in your head." I didn't understand what she meant, but I felt the ground shift. That night, I heard Soren and Dominic arguing. I caught pieces of it through the wall, and I caught my name. When Soren came to me the next morning, distracted and closed off, I asked him directly, "I heard you say my name." He went still. He said, "There are things about my family I can't..." And I said, "I'm not asking about your family. I'm asking about whatever this is." He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "I don't want to leave." I said, "That's not an answer." He said, "No, but it's the truest thing I can say right now." He left the next morning, and under my door I found a page of sheet music. Something original, something handwritten. My name was the title. While he was gone, Dominic came to me alone. He was honest in the way that hurts more than cruelty. He told me his father was dying, that Soren could reclaim everything, his name, his inheritance, his place, if he returned to the family, resumed the engagement with Lena, and performed at the Ashby Foundation Gala as a formal homecoming. And then he said the thing that split me open. Meeting you actually makes it more likely he'll go back. You reminded him there's something to live for. Now he wants a future worth offering someone. The cruelty of it was almost mathematical. I had woken Soren up, and now he had a reason to walk back into a world I could never belong to. When Soren returned, he came straight to me. He said he was going to refuse. He was going to tell his father no, lose everything, and stay. And I looked at him, this man who had sat with me on my worst day and not tried to fix me, and I said, "Go." He said, "What?" I said, "Go, see your father, not for the money, not for Dominic, for you, because you'll spend the rest of your life regretting it, and I refuse to be the reason for that." He cupped my face in his hands. He said my name once, just my name, and then he left. 3 weeks later, I went home. I called my friend Petra, and I didn't explain everything. I just said, "I think I'm ready to play again." I sat down at the piano in my childhood home, and I played the piece he had named after me, from memory. Aunt Renata stood in the doorway and cried silently. It was the most honest moment we had ever shared. I didn't reach out to Soren. I didn't search for him. But 6 weeks later, I read that the Ashby Foundation Gala had taken place. The performer wasn't listed by program, just a single note. In memory of Frederick Ashby, a piece for solo cello, performed by his son, one final time. He went. He said goodbye to his father the only way he knew how, through music. And then, the note said, he left before the reception. I don't have a perfect ending for you. What I have is this. The day I met Soren Ashby, I had already decided to disappear. And without trying, without promising anything, without even knowing what he was doing, he made me remember that I was worth finding. I don't know if that's love. I think it might be something rarer. I think it might be grace. If this story found you on a hard day, I hope it stays with you. Drop a comment and tell me, has a stranger ever changed your life? Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded they are worth finding. I'll see you in the next one.